Then why didn't my mommy come? A 5-year-old girl asked that question while sitting on concrete she'd slept on for 68 hours. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hands were shaking. She'd eaten nothing since Monday. She drank from a garden hose because the school locked its water fountains behind closed doors. A police officer saw her and waved. He waved back and kept driving. A principal stepped over her 6 times. A church full of people stared at her from across the street and went to brunch. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked her name. Then 800 Hells Angels rode in and did what an entire town refused to do. They gave a damn. Before we begin, subscribe to this channel and follow the story to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The call came in on a Wednesday night, and it changed everything. Wyatt Jennings, 22 years old, a prospect with the Phoenix Hells Angels charter, was riding north on Highway 69 towards Sedona when his gas light blinked on just outside Prescott Valley. He pulled into a station on the east side of town, filled up, and was about to get back on the road when something made him stop. Across the street sat Pinecrest Elementary School. The building was dark. The parking lot was empty. And near the flagpole, barely visible under a single security light, a small figure sat on the concrete with a purple backpack pressed against her chest. Wyatt stood at the gas pump and stared. He was new to the club, still earning his patch, still learning when to act and when to wait. His first instinct was to walk over. His second instinct, the one drilled into him by every older brother who taught him how the world really worked, told him not to approach a child alone at night. A young man with tattoos and a leather vest walking up to a little girl in a dark parking lot was a one-way ticket to a jail cell, no matter his intentions. So he didn't cross the street. He got on his bike and rode to Sedona and told himself somebody was handling it. 5 hours later, on his way back through Prescott Valley at 2 in the morning, he passed Pinecrest Elementary again. The girl was still there. Same spot, same purple backpack, curled up in a doorway behind the gymnasium, visible from the road only because Wyatt knew where to look. He pulled over, killed his engine, sat there for a full minute with his heart slamming against his ribs. A 5-year-old child, alone at a school, 2 in the morning, in the Arizona desert. He pulled out his phone and called his chapter president. "I don't know who she is," Wyatt said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know how long she's been there, but she was there at 9, and she's there now, and she's alone." His chapter president told him to stay put. Then he called the man who ran every Hells Angels operation in the state of Arizona. Garrett Iron McCord was asleep when the phone rang. He was 63 years old, and he'd learned a long time ago that calls after midnight never brought good news. He answered on the second ring. "We got a situation in Prescott Valley," his chapter president said, and told him what Wyatt had seen. Iron sat up in bed. "How old?" "Prospect says 5, maybe 6. Little brown-haired girl." "Where are the parents?" "Nobody knows. She's just sitting there." "Where are the cops?" "Nobody knows that either." Iron was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that people who knew him had learned to respect. Then he said 2 words that would set 800 motorcycles in motion. "I'll handle it." He didn't go back to sleep, not even close. He sat at his kitchen table on Juniper Road and picked up his phone and started making calls. The first was to Pinecrest Elementary School. Voicemail. He left a message. Direct, clear. "A child is alone at your school. Call me back." Nobody called back. The second call was to the Prescott Valley Police Department. A desk sergeant named Walsh answered with the flat tone of someone watching a clock. "I'm calling about a child at Pinecrest Elementary," Iron said. "Young girl, been sitting in the parking lot alone for at least 5 hours, possibly longer." "Are you the parent?" "No, I'm a concerned citizen." "Sir, we've had reports about the situation and it's being monitored." Iron's hand tightened on the phone. "Monitored? What does that mean?" "It means we're aware, and the appropriate parties have been notified. What appropriate parties? Who's been notified? Sir, I can't share details of an ongoing situation. If you'd like to file a formal report, a little girl is sitting alone at a school in the middle of the night, and you want me to file paperwork? Sir, I understand your concern. The situation is being handled. Iron hung up. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. He sat at that table and stared at the wall and turned one word over in his mind. Handled. The situation was being handled. In Iron's 63 years of experience, when someone in authority told you a situation was being handled, it meant one thing. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted the responsibility. Nobody wanted the paperwork. So they said the word handled and hoped the problem would go away on its own. He called Child Protective Services at 8 in the morning. A clerk named Beverly answered with the kind of bored patience that comes from answering the same phone 1,000 times. I need to report an unaccompanied minor at Pinecrest Elementary in Prescott Valley. How old is the child? 5 or 6. And how long has she been unaccompanied? At least since last night, possibly longer. We'll open a file and send a caseworker within 72 hours. Iron's knuckles went white around the phone. 72 hours? You want 3 more days to check on a kid who's already been out there God knows how long? Sir, we have a backlog. Every case is prioritized based on, she's 5 years old. Sir, I understand. We'll get someone out there as soon as possible. Iron hung up again. He sat at his table and looked at his hands. Scarred knuckles, grease under the nails. Hands that had done hard things for hard reasons his entire life. He thought about Wyatt's voice on the phone, the way it had cracked when he described the girl. He thought about the desk sergeant who was monitoring the situation. He thought about the caseworker who'd show up in 72 hours, which meant Monday at the earliest. And that was if the backlog didn't push it to Tuesday, or Wednesday, or never. He picked up the phone one more time. Not to call an office, not to leave a voicemail, not to file a report. He called Jace. Get your guys ready, Iron said. Saturday, 5 o'clock, Pinecrest Elementary, Prescott Valley. What's going on? A 5-year-old girl's been sitting in a school parking lot and nobody's coming for her. Jace Holliday had been Iron's VP for 14 years. He'd heard Iron angry. He'd heard Iron dangerous. But he'd never heard Iron sound like this. Like something underneath the anger had broken open, and what came out was worse. How long? Jace asked. At least since Wednesday night. Could be longer. Silence on the line. Then Jace said, how many you want? Everyone. The word went out like a signal fire across the state of Arizona. Charter to charter. Brother to brother. Phone to phone. Across every mile of highway, through every desert town and mountain pass. Wyatt's call became a story. The story became a mission. By Thursday night, every Hells Angels member in Arizona knew the details. A 5-year-old girl, abandoned at a school, days without food, days without water, no one coming. But all of that was still 2 days away, and in those 2 days, a little girl named Emma Dawson was alone. Her name was Emma. She was 5 years old. She had brown hair that used to be brushed and braided before her grandmother stopped coming around. She had blue-gray eyes that tracked every car in the pickup lane with a hope that got smaller by the hour. She had a purple backpack with a broken zipper and a lunchbox inside that had been empty since Monday. Her mother's name was Kristen Dawson, 30 years old, sandy brown hair, or it used to be, before the meth thinned it out and turned her skin the color of old paper. Kristen had been a good mother once, or at least a trying mother. The kind who showed up late to school events but showed up. The kind who forgot permission slips but remembered birthdays. Then Brody moved in. Brody came with charm and a duffel bag and a glass pipe that Kristen tried once and then couldn't stop trying. Within 2 months, the apartment that had been messy but livable became something else. Dishes piled to the ceiling, groceries stopped appearing. Emma learned to make herself peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because nobody else was going to do it. On Monday afternoon, Kristen was supposed to pick Emma up at 3:10. Emma stood at the curb with her purple backpack and watched every car that pulled in. Her mother's old Honda wasn't any of them. By 3:30, the pickup lane was empty. Emma sat down on the steps and waited. She was good at waiting. She'd been practicing for months. Waiting for her mother to come home from wherever she went with Brody. Waiting for dinner that sometimes didn't happen. Waiting for the sound of the front door that meant she wasn't alone anymore. 3:30 became 4 o'clock. Principal Gerald Marsh locked the front doors. He was a tall man with a receding hairline and the particular confidence of someone who believed that following procedure was the same thing as doing the right thing. He walked past Emma on his way to his car. His eyes moved over her the way they'd move over a speed bump, registering her presence without engaging with it. Emma watched him drive away. By 5 o'clock, only one car passed the school every few minutes. Emma sat on the steps and hugged her backpack and told herself her mother was stuck in traffic. Her mother was at the store. Her mother would be here any minute. The stories she told herself were the kind children build when the truth is too big to carry. Small, fragile explanations that hold the world together just long enough to get through one more hour. At 6:15, Officer Kyle Prescott drove past on his evening patrol. He was 31, 3 years on the force, and he drove the school route twice a day because it was an easy assignment, and he liked easy assignments. He saw Emma sitting on the steps. He slowed his cruiser. He looked right at her. Emma waved. He waved back and kept driving. In his report later, he'd say he assumed a parent was inside the building. The building whose doors had been locked for 2 hours. That wave was Monday's cruelest moment. A child reaching out to the one person whose entire job was to protect her, and that person waving back like it was a greeting instead of a cry for help. Night came fast. Emma discovered the alcove behind the gym, a recessed doorway that blocked the wind. She put her backpack on the ground and curled up with her knees against her chest and her arms wrapped around herself. The desert cold cut through her thin t-shirt like it wasn't there. She shivered and thought about her lavender blanket at home, the one her grandmother had given her, the one that smelled like laundry soap in safety. She didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was for when there was someone to hear it. Tuesday morning, the school opened and children arrived, and Emma moved to the front steps. She drank from the playground fountain, filling her stomach with water until the hunger backed off enough to think. Her teacher, Mrs. Rachel Torres, marked her absent for the second straight day. On her lunch break, Mrs. Torres walked to the front office. "Emma Dawson hasn't been in class since Friday," she told the secretary. "I'd like to flag it to Mr. Marsh. I'll put it on his list. It should be a priority. Multiple days absent, no parent contact. I'll put it on his list." Mrs. Torres went back to her classroom. She didn't know Emma was 30 feet away, sitting on the front steps of the building where she taught, because nobody told her and she had no reason to look. She'd done her part, she'd reported it, the system would handle it. But the system was Marsh. And Marsh's list was a legal pad on his desk that he checked once a day between lunch and his 2 o'clock meeting. When he saw Emma's name, he picked up the phone and dialed Kristen Dawson's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He left a message. He checked the box next to Emma's name. That was it. That was the system. One voicemail to a woman who was lying in a motel room 15 miles away with the curtains drawn and a glass pipe cooling on the nightstand. Tuesday afternoon, a 4th grade teacher named Lauren Foley walked past Emma for the second time. Lauren was 36, recently divorced. She'd rebuilt her post-divorce identity around wellness and self-care. Her Instagram was full of inspirational quotes about resilience and showing up for people. She saw Emma on the steps. She recognized her. Every teacher in the school knew Emma Dawson, the quiet girl with the brown hair who always looked a little too thin and wore clothes that were a little too small. Lauren's brain processed what she saw. Her legs kept moving. She'd tell herself later that she thought Emma was waiting for a late parent. She'd tell herself she didn't want to overstep. She'd tell herself a lot of things. The truth was simpler and uglier. Getting involved meant responsibility. Responsibility meant complications. Complications meant disrupting the careful, curated life she'd built from the wreckage of her marriage. So she walked past a hungry child and got into her car and drove home and posted a quote on Instagram about the importance of showing up for people. Wednesday morning, Emma stopped expecting her mother. The shift happened sometime between dawn and the first bell. A quiet, internal reorganization that no one witnessed. She'd spent 2 nights on concrete. She'd eaten nothing since Monday's lunch at school. Her stomach had moved past growling into a dull, heavy ache that sat in her middle like a stone. But worse than the hunger was the knowing, the slow, crushing understanding that her mother wasn't late, hadn't forgotten, wasn't stuck in traffic. Her mother wasn't coming. Emma was 5 years old, and she understood this with a clarity that would have destroyed most adults. She didn't scream or rage or run. She sat on the steps and pulled her knees to her chest and got very small and very quiet and accepted the fact that she had been left behind. Officer Prescott drove past at 8:15. He saw her. He kept driving. He drove past again at 5:30. Same thing. 2 more data points in a pattern that would later be described in an internal investigation as a failure to act on observable indicators of child endangerment. In plain language, he saw a little girl alone for the 3rd straight day and did nothing. Wednesday night was bad, but Thursday was the night that almost killed her. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. Emma shivered so violently her teeth chattered and her jaw ached. She tucked her hands inside her shirt and pressed them against her stomach for warmth. She thought about her mother's voice, the way it sounded before Brody, soft and tired but present. She thought about the time Kristen had taken her to get ice cream after a dentist appointment, how they'd sat in the car eating cones, and Kristen had gotten chocolate on her nose, and Emma had laughed until her stomach hurt. That memory was the cruelest thing Emma owned. Not because it was bad, because it was proof that her mother had once been capable of love, which meant the absence of love was a choice. Friday came and went. Principal Marsh locked the doors at 4. He walked past her. He saw her. He kept walking. 4 days in a row, the man responsible for every child in that building had stepped within 10 feet of a starving kindergartner and chosen his parking spot over her life. Saturday morning, Emma woke up and the fountain was locked behind the school's closed doors. No water until Monday. She lay in her alcove for a long time, too weak to stand right away, her head pounding, her vision blurring at the edges. When she finally got up, her legs shook beneath her. She found the garden hose 2 blocks away, a green rubber hose coiled on the side of a yellow house. She turned the spigot and water came out, warm and metallic, and she drank until her stomach cramped. Then she walked back to the school, because the school was where Mommy would look for her. That was the logic, unshakable, heartbreaking. The logic of a 5-year-old who still believed in a mother who had stopped believing in herself. A man walking his dog saw Emma crossing the street. He watched her walk back to the school and sit down on the steps. He looked at her for a long moment. His dog pulled at the leash. He tugged the leash and kept walking. Saturday afternoon, Emma started talking to herself. Quiet conversations about what she'd eat when her mommy came. About whether she'd be in trouble for staying at school so long. About whether her lavender blanket was still on her bed. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and high and far away, like it belonged to a different girl. Sunday morning, the Prescott Valley Community Church opened its doors directly across from Pinecrest Elementary. Cars filled the parking lot. Families walked inside in nice clothes, holding Bibles and coffee cups. 3 of them saw Emma. 3 human beings looked at a 5-year-old girl sitting alone on school steps and made a decision. They decided she wasn't their business. They walked into a building where a man in a white collar talked about the Good Samaritan. about seeing suffering and choosing compassion. And then they walked back out and drove home. One woman stopped at her car and stared at Emma for almost a full minute. Emma stared back. The woman held her keys in one hand and her Bible in the other, and she stood there long enough for doubt to form and dissolve and form again. Then she got in her car and left. That was the moment Emma Dawson stopped believing that adults could be trusted. Not her mother, not teachers, not police officers, not strangers, not churchgoers. 68 hours of evidence had led her to a conclusion that no 5-year-old should ever have to reach. She was on her own. The world could see her, and the world did not care. She retreated to her alcove behind the gym and curled up with her purple backpack and closed her eyes and waited for something. Anything. Though she no longer knew what she was waiting for. 300 miles south, Iron McCord stood in his garage, tightening the last bolt on a motorcycle sidecar he'd been welding together since Thursday night. It was small, reinforced, a padded seat and a safety harness he'd added at the last minute. Built for a child, built for a girl he'd never met but couldn't stop thinking about. He set down his wrench and picked up his phone. 53 unread messages, charter updates, head counts, route confirmations, 800 brothers ready to ride at dawn. He typed a message to Jace. "We leave at 4. Nobody's late. Nobody." Jace replied in 3 seconds. "Nobody." Iron put down his phone and looked at the sidecar. Then he walked inside the house and stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was empty. Bare walls, bare floor, a bed with no sheets. He hadn't been inside it in years. He walked to the closet, found an old quilt, and spread it across the bed. He didn't know if anyone would ever sleep in this room. He made the bed anyway. At 4 in the morning, 800 Hells Angels started their engines across the state of Arizona. The sound rolled across deserts and through mountain passes and along empty highways. A low building thunder that meant something was coming that couldn't be stopped and wouldn't be turned away. Iron pulled out of Juniper Road at the head of the column. 73 bikes fell in behind him. They rode north through the dark toward Prescott Valley, toward a 5-year-old girl who had no idea that the world was about to remember she existed. And in her alcove behind the gym of Pinecrest Elementary, Emma Dawson slept with her head on her purple backpack and her arms wrapped around herself, and no one coming, and no one there, and no one who cared. Until today. Monday morning hit Emma Dawson like a punishment she didn't understand. She opened her eyes, and for a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then the concrete pressed cold against her hip, and the smell of dust filled her nose, and everything came rushing back. The school, the doorway, the 5th morning without her mother. She sat up slowly. Her body ached in places she didn't have words for. Her neck was stiff from sleeping on her backpack. Her stomach had stopped growling sometime during the night, and that scared her more than the hunger itself. It was like her body had given up asking. She stood and her legs felt strange, rubbery, weak, like they belonged to someone else. She walked to the front of the building and reached the playground fountain and pressed the button. Water came out. She drank until her stomach cramped because she'd learned by now that water might not be there tomorrow. She sat down near the flagpole, her usual spot, the spot where her mother could see her from the pickup lane. Students filed past her. Some of them looked, some of them whispered. A second grader named Marcus stopped right in front of her and held out half a granola bar. Emma took it and ate it so fast she almost choked. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked. Before Emma could answer, his mother grabbed his arm and pulled him toward their car. "Don't talk to strangers, Marcus." She didn't look at Emma, didn't ask why a 5-year-old was eating like she hadn't seen food in days, just pulled her son away and drove off. That granola bar kept Emma alive. Inside the school, Mrs. Rachel Torres marked Emma absent for the 5th straight day. She walked to the front office for the 3rd time. "Mr. Marsh, Emma Dawson has been absent since last week. I filed a report on Tuesday. Nothing has happened." Marsh leaned back in his chair. "I contacted the mother. Left a voicemail. I'm waiting to hear back. A voicemail? That's it? Mrs. Torres, it's a family matter. We've done our part. Our part? She's 5 years old. And her mother has been notified. If there's no response by Wednesday, we'll escalate. Wednesday is 2 more days. I'm aware of the calendar, Mrs. Torres. She stared at him. She wanted to say more. She wanted to grab him by his pressed collar and drag him to the front steps and make him look. But she didn't know Emma was out there. She thought the girl was home. She thought the system was working. She was wrong on both counts. But at least she tried, which put her 1 step ahead of everyone else in that building. Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock, Marsh locked the doors. He was 15 feet from Emma. She could have called out. She could have said something. But she'd learned by now that calling out didn't work. Waving didn't work. Being visible didn't work. Nothing worked. Marsh drove away. Emma went back to her doorway. 600 miles of Arizona highway hummed with motorcycles that night. Iron McCord rode north from Phoenix, with 73 brothers behind him, their headlights cutting through the desert darkness. From the south, Jace led the Tucson convoy, 38 bikes in tight formation. From the east, riders from small towns nobody had heard of roared through mountain passes. From the west, the Yuma charter crossed the desert at full speed. They converged on Prescott Valley in the early hours of Tuesday morning, filling motel parking lots and gas stations. The town had no idea what was coming. 800 Hells Angels, the largest single gathering in the Arizona Charter's history. And they weren't there for a rally or a funeral or a fight. They were there for a 5-year-old girl. Jace found Iron at a rest stop outside town at 6 in the morning. Iron hadn't slept. His eyes were red, and his jaw was set in that way Jace had learned to read over 14 years of riding together. 812 confirmed, Jace said. Phoenix, Tucson, Prescott, Sedona, Yuma, all here. Nomads came in from as far as Kingman. I got retired guys who haven't ridden in 10 years. Iron nodded. Boone? He's here. Brought his daughter-in-law. She's a pediatric nurse. Good, we're going to need her. Jace sat down across from him. Iron, I gotta ask you something. Ask. What happens after? We show up, we make noise, we get the kids some food. Then what? CPS takes her, puts her in a foster home, and 6 months from now she's somebody else's problem that nobody handles. Iron didn't answer right away. He stared at his hands for a long time. Then he folded them together and looked at Jace with an expression his VP had never seen before. Not anger, not determination, something deeper. Something that looked like a man making a decision he couldn't take back. I'm not going to let that happen, Iron said. What does that mean? It means what it means. Jace studied his face. They'd known each other 22 years, rode together, fought together, buried brothers together. Jace knew every expression Iron had. This one was new. You're serious, Jace said. When have I not been? Boone Calloway arrived at the rest stop 30 minutes later. He was 65 years old, the club's sergeant-at-arms for over 20 years. He'd seen things that would break most men. He'd done things he carried in silence. But when Iron had called him about the girl 2 days ago, Boone's voice had cracked on the phone. How old? Boone had asked. 5. And then silence. And then Boone had said, my granddaughter's 5. I know. I'll be there by 4. Bring everyone. Now Boone stood at the rest stop with his arms crossed and his face hard and his eyes holding something that wasn't hard at all. My daughter cried for an hour when I told her, he said. Asked me what I was going to do about it. What'd you tell her? What we always do, show up. Iron looked at both of them. Here's how this works. We ride in at 3:15, right when school lets out. We park in the church lot across the street. Nobody threatens anyone. Nobody touches anyone. We stand on public property and we don't leave until somebody with authority takes responsibility for that child. Police response? Jace asked. They'll lose their minds. 800 bikes rolling into a small town. They're going to think it's a war. Good, Boone said. Let them think whatever they want. Boone, you handle logistics. Food, water, first aid. Have your daughter-in-law standing by. Already done. Iron checked his phone. A text from Wyatt, the young prospect who'd started it all. Is she still there? Iron typed back. We'll know in 9 hours. Tuesday morning, Emma woke up and couldn't feel her fingers. She flexed them slowly, watching them move like they belonged to someone else. She was cold despite the heat. That scared her. Being cold when it was warm outside meant something was wrong inside her body. Even at 5, she understood that much. She made it to the front of the school just as the doors opened. She sat in her spot and watched parents drop off children. A teacher she didn't recognize walked past, glanced at her, kept going. A parent unloading kids from a minivan looked at her, frowned, turned away. Emma put her head on her knees and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Not sleepy tired, something deeper, a tiredness that lived in her bones. She thought about her bedroom at home, the lavender blanket, the stuffed bunny with one ear missing. She thought about her mother's voice singing to her before Brody moved in, before everything got strange and wrong and far away. She wondered if her mother was looking for her. She wasn't. Kristen Dawson was in the Copper Ridge Motel, room 9, with the curtains drawn and the TV playing to nobody. Brody had left 2 days ago, taking her car and what was left of her money. She was alone with a phone full of missed calls and a pipe that had stopped working because there was nothing left to put in it. She knew Emma was at the school. She knew it the way you know the sun is up, even with the curtains closed. She knew it, and she couldn't move. Couldn't make her body get up and drive 15 miles and be a mother. The shame was so enormous, it had become its own kind of paralysis. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd go tomorrow. She'd been telling herself that since Monday. At 3:10, the final bell rang at Pinecrest Elementary. Children poured out. Parents collected them. The parking lot emptied. Emma sat alone near the flagpole. And then she heard it. Low at first, like a truck far away on the highway. But it didn't fade. It grew. Deeper. Louder. A vibration she could feel in her chest before her ears could make sense of it. The sound built and built until it became a wall of noise. A mechanical roar that rattled the chain-link fence around the playground and set off a car alarm across the street. Emma raised her head. Motorcycles filled Ridgeway Avenue. Not 5 or 10 or 20, hundreds. An endless column of chrome and leather and noise that stretched back as far as she could see. They moved slowly, deliberately, engines growling like something alive and angry. The lead bike turned into the church parking lot, then the next, then the next. They kept coming. The lot filled and they spilled onto the street, onto the sidewalk, onto every inch of space. Men and women dismounted, all wearing the same leather vest, the same patch on the back. A winged skull. Hell's Angels, Arizona. Emma watched all of this from her spot near the flagpole. She didn't move. She didn't run. She'd used up her fear days ago. All she had left was a kind of numb curiosity, the way you watch a storm approach when you're already soaked to the bone. Iron killed his engine and swung off his bike. He stood for a moment, scanning the school grounds with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Then he saw her, a small brown-haired girl in dirty clothes, curled up near a flagpole, watching him with eyes that had no hope left in them. His chest tightened so hard he couldn't breathe for a second. He'd been angry for days, cold, controlled anger that he'd channeled into phone calls and logistics, and the precise work of welding a sidecar at 3 in the morning. But seeing her, actually seeing this child, the anger became something else, something that burned hotter and cut deeper, something that felt a lot like heartbreak. He looked at Jace, then at Boone. They'd seen her too. Boone's hand was shaking. Jace's jaw was locked so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. Get a perimeter up, Iron said quietly. Nobody gets near her until I say. Behind them, 800 bikers spread out around the school like a human wall. The sound of their boots on pavement was the sound of an army that had decided, unanimously and without hesitation, that one small girl was worth the ride. Iron crossed Ridgeway Avenue. Jace and Boone flanked him. They walked slowly, giving Emma time to see them, time to decide if she wanted to run. She didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She just watched them come with those ancient, empty eyes. Iron stopped 10 feet away and lowered himself to one knee. Up close, it was worse than he'd imagined. So much worse. Her skin was red and peeling from sunburn. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hair was matted with sweat and dirt. She was so thin he could see the bones in her wrists. But it was her eyes that nearly destroyed him. Blue-gray eyes and a 5-year-old face that held the kind of exhaustion you see in people who've given up on everything. Even being afraid. He'd seen that look before. In prison. In hospitals. In men twice her age who'd run out of reasons to keep going. He'd never seen it in a child. "Hey, sweetheart," Iron said, and his voice came out softer than he knew it could. "My name's Iron. What's yours?" She looked at him for a long time, studying his face the way a child studies something they're trying to decide about. Then, in a voice so small he had to lean forward to hear it, she said, "Emma," and 800 Hell's Angels held their breath. "Emma," Iron repeated, like her name was something sacred. "That's a beautiful name. How long have you been here, sweetheart?" She held up her hand, all 5 fingers spread wide. Then she folded her thumb down. 4. 4 days? She nodded. Behind Iron, Boone turned away. He walked 3 steps, put his hands on his knees and bent over like he'd been punched in the stomach. Jace didn't move, but his eyes were wet, and he kept blinking fast, like he could stop it if he just blinked hard enough. "Are you hungry, Emma?" Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard, trying to hold it in, trying to keep the wall up that had kept her alive for 4 days. Then she nodded, and the wall cracked, and a sound came out of her that wasn't crying exactly. It was something worse. A thin, high whimper like a puppy left outside too long. The sound of a child who had forgotten how to ask for help, but whose body remembered anyway. Iron didn't reach for her. He knew better. A scared child doesn't want to be grabbed, even by someone trying to help. So he stayed where he was, one knee on the concrete, hands open, visible. "We're going to get you food right now, okay? And water. And then we're going to sit right here with you. Nobody's leaving. You understand me? Nobody." Emma looked past him at the wall of leather and chrome and hard faces stretching across the street. "Are they all with you?" "Every single one." "Why?" The question hung in the air. A 5-year-old girl who had spent 68 hours learning that nobody cared, asking the most basic and devastating question a human being can ask. Why would you bother? Iron held her gaze. "Because you matter, Emma," and somebody needed to say it out loud. Emma stared at him. Something shifted behind those exhausted eyes. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest crack in the wall she'd built, the smallest opening where hope might eventually find a way in. "Boone," Iron said without turning around. Boone straightened up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and walked over. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "Yeah. Food. Now. Chicken nuggets, fries, juice, water, whatever's closest. Take 2 brothers and go." Boone was already moving before Iron finished the sentence. He grabbed 2 riders from the perimeter, and they were on their bikes and gone in under 30 seconds. Jace crouched beside Iron. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a half-melted candy bar, the kind you find at the bottom of a bag after a long ride. He held it out to Emma. "It's a little squished," he said, "but it still tastes good." Emma looked at Iron. Iron nodded. She took the candy bar and unwrapped it with shaking fingers and ate it in 4 bites, barely chewing. Jace had to look away, because watching a child eat like that like she was racing against the possibility that someone would take it from her, was something he knew he'd carry for the rest of his life. 15 riders formed a tight circle around Emma. Their broad backs became a wall that blocked every camera, every phone, every lens that was already appearing on the street. They gave her the one thing nobody had given her in 68 hours: privacy. 60 seconds later, the first siren cut through the air. Officer Kyle Prescott's cruiser pulled into the school parking lot with lights flashing and no siren. He stepped out and his hand went to his belt. Not his weapon, but close enough. He was 31 years old and he had never seen 800 motorcycles in one place outside of a television screen. He walked toward Iron with the straight-back stride they teach at the academy, the one designed to project authority. It works on most people. It did not work on Iron McCord. "Sir, I need you to step away from the child." Iron stood slowly. All 245 pounds of him rose to his full height, and he looked at Prescott the way you look at something small and disappointing. "What's her name, officer?" Prescott's stride faltered. "Excuse me?" "The child. You've driven past this school twice a day, every day this week. You saw her Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and today. That's over a dozen times you drove past a 5-year-old girl sitting alone in a parking lot." Iron's voice dropped low, the kind of quiet that's more dangerous than shouting. "So I'm asking you, what's her name?" Prescott's face went from pink to red. "Sir, this is a police matter and I need you to—" "Her name is Emma Dawson. She's 5 years old. She's been sitting right here for over 60 hours. No food, no water, no one." Iron stepped closer. "You waved at her on Monday. She waved back. Did you stop? Did you get out of your car? Did you walk 20 feet and ask a kindergartner why she was sitting alone at a school after dark?" "We had information that a parent was—" "What parent? What information? Who told you that?" Prescott opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out, because there was nothing to say. No one had told him anything. He'd assumed. He'd assumed a 5-year-old child was fine because assuming was easier than checking. "That's what I thought," Iron said. 2 more cruisers arrived, then a third. Officers stepped out and formed a line like they were preparing for a riot. Behind Iron, 800 bikers stood perfectly still. They didn't shout. They didn't advance. They just stood there. A wall of leather and silence that was more intimidating than any threat could have been. Sergeant Frank Avery took charge. He was older than Prescott, thick-necked, balding. He approached Iron with his palms out. "Mr. McCord, I know who you are. I know your organization. I don't want trouble today." "Then don't bring any. We haven't broken a single law. We're standing on public property next to a child your department left to starve." Avery flinched. "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen, Sergeant? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like every uniform in this town drove past a little girl for days and decided she wasn't worth 5 minutes of paperwork." "We received a call about her on Wednesday," Avery said carefully. "We were told the mother had been contacted and the situation was being resolved." "Who told you that?" Avery hesitated. "The school." Iron turned and looked at the building. The school. The school that locked its doors every day at 4 o'clock with a 5-year-old sitting on the steps. He turned back to Avery. "You people keep using the word handled. Let me tell you what handled looks like. Handled is 800 men riding 300 miles because a 22-year-old kid on a gas run had the basic human decency to make a phone call. That's handled. What you did is the opposite of handled. What you did is pray it goes away." Avery had no response. Because Iron wasn't wrong, and every officer on that line knew it. Emma sat inside the circle of bikers, eating the last of Jace's candy bar, watching adults argue about her like she was a problem to be solved instead of a child to be saved. She'd seen that look before. The look of people talking about her instead of talking to her. Iron noticed. He turned away from the sergeant and crouched down again. "You doing okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were on the police officers. "Am I in trouble?" The question hit Iron like a fist to the chest. 68 hours abandoned, and this child thought she was the one who'd done something wrong. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? None of it." She looked at him and her eyes filled with tears. Not the silent kind she taught herself to hold back. Real tears that spilled over and ran down her sunburned cheeks. "Then why didn't my mommy come?" Iron had been in fights that drew blood. He'd been shot at. He'd buried his best friend on a rainy morning in 2012. None of it hurt like this. None of it came close. "I don't know, baby, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Boone roared back into the parking lot with 2 riders and 8 bags of food. He dismounted and brought them to Iron like a man on a mission from God. Chicken nuggets, fries, apple juice, chocolate milk, 2 bottles of water, and a cookie the size of Emma's face. Emma reached for the chicken nuggets and Iron let her take them. She ate with both hands, cramming food into her mouth with a desperation that made grown bikers turn their backs and wipe their eyes. Jace quietly organized 15 riders into a tighter circle around her, their broad backs blocking every camera, every phone, every news helicopter that had appeared overhead in the last 10 minutes. They gave a 5-year-old girl the dignity that 68 hours of civilization had denied her. And behind them, 800 Hells Angels stood in formation around Pinecrest Elementary School. And not one of them moved, and not one of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that the silence didn't say better. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot at 4:47. Every head turned. Every biker on the perimeter shifted just slightly, the way a wall shifts when it senses pressure from the other side. A woman in a gray suit stepped out, badge clipped to her belt, tablet in her hand. She moved with the controlled urgency of someone who'd been driving too fast for too long and was now forcing herself to slow down. Diane Vasquez, Yavapai County Child Protective Services. 15 years on the job. She'd been at a training seminar in Phoenix when her supervisor called with the kind of update that makes you pull over on the highway and close your eyes. A child abandoned at a school, multiple days, media on scene, 800 Hells Angels involved. Get there now. She'd driven 130 miles in under 2 hours, and every mile she'd felt the weight of what was waiting for her get heavier. Diane approached Iron with the careful respect of someone who understood exactly how delicate this moment was. She knew who the Hells Angels were. She also knew what they'd done today. In 15 years with CPS, she'd seen plenty of people talk about protecting children. These were the first 800 who'd actually shown up. "Mr. McCord," Iron turned. His eyes were hard but not hostile, measuring her. "Miss Vasquez," he said, reading her badge. "You're CPS." "I am. I need to evaluate the child and take her into protective custody." "Where were you 4 days ago?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of a man who'd spent 4 days calling the people who were supposed to care and getting nothing but voicemail and excuses. Diane took it without flinching. "I was in Phoenix. The report didn't reach my desk until this afternoon. I can't defend what happened before that, and I won't try, but I'm here now, and that child needs medical attention." Iron respected that. No excuses, no deflection, just the truth delivered clean. "Her name is Emma. She's been eating for about 10 minutes. First food she's had since Monday." Diane closed her eyes, just for a second. When she opened them, they were hard with a fury she kept carefully contained. "Monday. Over 4 days without food," she paused. "And no water since Saturday when the school locked?" "She found a garden hose 2 blocks away. She's 5 years old and she kept herself alive because no adult in this city bothered to do it for her." Diane knelt beside Emma. Iron watched her carefully. The CPS worker was gentle, professional. She checked Emma's eyes, her pulse, the sunburn on her face and arms. She asked questions in a soft voice. "Do you hurt anywhere, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head. "Can you tell me your birthday?" "March 12th. "Good girl. Do you know your address?" 412 Copper Lane, apartment B. "But Mommy's not there anymore." Diane glanced at Iron. He held her gaze. They both understood what neither of them said out loud. "Are you going to find my mommy?" Emma asked. The question filled the space between the two adults like smoke. Diane's pen stopped moving over her tablet. "We're going to take care of you, sweetheart," Diane said. "That's what matters right now." Emma looked down at her chicken nuggets. She picked one up and held it, but didn't eat it. Like she was saving it. Like she'd already learned that food might not come again. Iron saw that, and something inside his chest folded in half. A Mercedes pulled into the parking lot at 512. Principal Gerald Marsh stepped out wearing a polo shirt and khakis. A lawyer in a dark suit climbed out behind him. Marsh had been at home watching football when his assistant called and told him to turn on the news. The blood had drained from his face so fast, his wife thought he was having a stroke. He walked toward the school with the expression of a man approaching his own execution. Cameras swung toward him. Reporters shouted questions. His lawyer was already talking. Something about cooperation and transparency and the school's commitment to student safety. Iron intercepted them 10 feet from the police line. "Mr. Marsh." Marsh stopped. He was taller than Iron, but somehow seemed much smaller. His eyes darted to the cameras, to the bikers, to the police, to everywhere except the girl near the flagpole. "How many times did you walk past her?" We didn't know the extent of how many times." Marsh's lawyer stepped forward. "My client isn't going to answer questions without—" "I'm not a cop," Iron said. "I'm not a reporter. I'm the guy who found out about a starving child 4 days after you started stepping over her." He took one step closer. "How many times?" Marsh's face crumbled. The lawyer put a hand on his arm. Marsh shook it off. The guilt had been building since he'd seen the news footage, and it came out now like water through a cracked dam. 8 times, he whispered. "Twice a day. I locked the doors and I saw her and I thought—" He trailed off. "You thought what?" "I thought someone else was handling it." Iron stared at him for a long time. Long enough for the cameras to catch every second. Long enough for Marsh to feel the full weight of what those words meant. "That's what everyone thought," Iron said. "And a 5-year-old girl nearly died because of it." Marsh's knees buckled slightly. His lawyer caught his arm. Tears were running down the principal's face now, but Iron had no sympathy to give. Not today, maybe not ever. Sympathy was for people who'd tried and failed. Marsh hadn't tried at all. A news van from Phoenix pulled up on Ridgeway Avenue, then another. Then a satellite truck with a national logo on the side. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. The helicopter was joined by a drone. The footage was everywhere already. 800 bikers surrounding a school. A tiny girl eating chicken nuggets inside a ring of leather-clad protectors. Police standing uselessly on the perimeter. And a principal with tears running down his face, trying to explain why he'd locked a door 8 times and left a child outside. Mayor David Harlan arrived at 5:45 with his chief of staff and a hastily printed statement about community values and swift action. He pushed through the crowd with the confidence of a man used to being in charge. "I'm Mayor Harlan. I want to assure you and the public that—" "Save it." Harlan blinked. People didn't interrupt the mayor. "Where were you this week?" Iron asked. "Your office is 4 blocks from this school. Your police drove past this girl every day. Your teachers walked past her every day. Your town watched a child starve for over 60 hours. And you're going to stand there with a printed statement about community values?" "Mr. McCord, I understand you're upset." "I'm past upset. I've been past upset since Wednesday when I called your police department and a desk sergeant told me the situation was being handled." Iron's voice went quiet, controlled, lethal. It was not being handled. It was being ignored. By everyone, including you. Harlan's chief of staff tried to steer him away. Harlan shrugged her off. And then, to his credit, or maybe to his shame, he looked at Emma. Really looked at her. A 5-year-old girl with sunburned skin and cracked lips, in a purple backpack, eating fries like they were the last food on earth. My God, he said quietly, she's been here the whole time? Right there, Iron said, where you're looking. That's where she's been, in front of everyone. Harlan didn't say anything else. He stood there with his printed statement hanging at his side and watched Emma eat. And whatever political calculation had been running behind his eyes went dark, replaced by something that might have been genuine horror, or might have been the realization that his career was about to implode. Iron didn't care which. Both led to the same place. Diane Vasquez approached Iron at 6:15. Emma had finished eating and was drinking water in small, careful sips. A paramedic from the arriving ambulance had checked her vitals. Dehydrated, malnourished, severe sunburn, but stable. She needed fluids and rest and food, and about 1,000 other things that couldn't be measured on a medical chart. I need to transport her to the hospital for a full evaluation, Diane said. Then emergency foster placement tonight. Where's her mother? Diane checked her tablet. Kristen Dawson, last known address, Copper Ridge Motel, room 9, Highway 40. Officers are en route. She paused. Mr. McCord, I have to be honest with you. A mother who leaves a 5-year-old child for this long isn't coming back. Not in any way that matters. What happens after the hospital? After foster care? Diane hesitated, because she knew what came next and she hated it. We look for relatives. If none are suitable or available, she enters the system. Foster homes. Eventually group care if placements fall through. How many placements fall through? Statistically, most of them. Iron looked at Emma. She'd stopped eating and was watching him with those blue-gray eyes that had already seen too much. She was holding a chicken nugget in one hand and her purple backpack strap in the other, and she looked like she was trying to decide which one to hold tighter. I want to be considered, Iron said. Diane stared at him. For what? Foster placement, emergency or otherwise. I want to be considered. Mr. McCord, you're the president of the Hells Angels. I'm the man who showed up. The state has requirements, background checks, home studies, interviews. I'll do all of it. Every form, every check, every interview, whatever it takes. This isn't how the system works. Iron turned to face her fully, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 800 brothers standing behind him, of 4 days of failed phone calls, of a little girl who'd kept herself alive with a garden hose because every system that was supposed to protect her had decided she wasn't worth the effort. The system had 68 hours, Miss Vasquez. My guys noticed in 5. You want to tell me the system works? Diane held his gaze. She was not a woman who backed down easily. 15 years of CPS work had burned the softness out of her long ago. But she also knew the truth when she heard it. And she knew that the man standing in front of her, with his scarred hands and leather vest and silver-streaked hair, had done more for Emma Dawson in 2 hours than every institution in this city had done in 4 days. I'll start the paperwork, she said. No promises, none. I don't need promises, I need a chance. Diane nodded once and walked back toward her vehicle. Iron watched her go. Then he returned to Emma. He knelt down and the girl looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and terror. The look of someone who wants desperately to believe, but has been taught that believing is dangerous. Emma, this lady is going to take you to see a doctor. Make sure you're healthy and strong. And then you're going to stay somewhere safe tonight. Where? A house with a nice lady who takes care of kids. Emma's face tightened. The hope flickered and almost went out. Are you coming? I can't come tonight, but I will come tomorrow. First thing in the morning, People say that. Emma's voice was flat, stripped of everything. No anger, no sadness, just the terrible calm of a child stating a fact she'd confirmed through experience. They say they'll come and then they don't. Iron felt those words carve into him like a knife drawn slow across bone. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small metal pin, the Hell's Angels death head, the winged skull that meant everything to every member of the club. He'd carried it for 30 years. It had been on his vest through every ride, every fight, every funeral, every mile. He held it out to Emma. You see this? This is the most important thing I own. I'm giving it to you, and I'm going to need it back, so I have to come tomorrow. Understand? Emma took the pin. She turned it over in her small fingers, studying the winged skull with the seriousness of a child who has learned to weigh the value of promises against the evidence of her life. You promise? On my life. She closed her fingers around the pin and held it against her chest. And something in her eyes shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the decision to try, to test one more time whether the world could keep a promise. Diane brought her county vehicle to the curb. A paramedic helped Emma into the back seat. They buckled her in gently. Someone handed her a blanket. She pulled it around her shoulders, but didn't let go of the pin. Iron stood on the sidewalk and watched the door close. Through the window, Emma pressed her palm against the glass. The pin clutched in her other hand. Her eyes locked on his. The car pulled away, turned left on Ridgeway Avenue. The taillights shrank to red dots and then disappeared. 800 Hell's Angels stood in the parking lot of Pinecrest Elementary, and not one of them spoke. The cameras kept rolling. The helicopters circled. The police shifted on the perimeter. But the bikers stood in silence, because there was nothing to say that the silence didn't say better. Jace walked up beside Iron. You good? Iron didn't answer for a long time. He watched the empty street where the car had gone. His hands hung at his sides, and his scarred knuckles were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I gave her my pin, Iron said. Jace understood what that meant. In 30 years, Iron had never given that pin to anyone. Not his ex-wife, not his brothers, not a single soul. So you're really doing this, Jace said. Iron didn't answer the question. He turned and walked toward his bike. 800 brothers watched him go. He threw his leg over the Harley and gripped the handlebars and sat there with his head down. Then he started the engine, and the sound broke the silence like a crack of thunder. One by one, every bike in the lot roared to life behind him, a rolling wave of sound that shook the windows of every house on Ridgeway Avenue, that rattled the locked doors of Pinecrest Elementary, that echoed off the walls of the community church where 44 people had stepped over a child to go pray about compassion. Iron pulled out of the lot. 800 bikes followed. They rode through downtown Prescott Valley in a column that stretched for over a mile. Past the police station, where Sergeant Walsh stood at the window, watching with his mouth open. Past the mayor's office, where the lights were on and crisis meetings were already underway. Past the Copper Ridge Motel, where Kristen Dawson sat in room 9, hearing the thunder, knowing somewhere in the broken part of her brain that still worked that it had something to do with the daughter she'd abandoned. The ride lasted 20 minutes. Then the bikers scattered to motels and rest stops and friends' houses across the city. By midnight, Prescott Valley was quiet again. But nothing about this town would ever be quiet in the same way. In an emergency foster home on the east side of town, Emma Dawson lay in a strange bed in a strange room, wearing borrowed pajamas, 2 sizes too big. Mrs. Langford, the foster mother, had given her a bath and warm milk and tucked her in with a gentleness that felt foreign after 68 hours of concrete and indifference. Emma held Iron's pin under the covers. She pressed the metal into her palm until she could feel every edge, every ridge of the winged skull. She thought about his face when he'd knelt in front of her, the scars on his hands, the way his voice went soft when he talked to her, like he was afraid she might break. She thought about what he'd said. You matter. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not like that. Not like they meant it with their whole body. She closed her eyes and held the pin tighter and whispered into the dark room. Please come back. Please come back. Please come back. 3 words, repeated like a prayer, by a 5-year-old girl who had every reason in the world not to believe in anything, but who held a dead man's skull in her hand and chose to believe anyway. Iron didn't go home. He rode to Juniper Road and walked inside and sat at his kitchen table and stared at the wall. He didn't eat. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there in the dark with his hands flat on the table and his mind turning over everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. Somewhere around 2 a.m, he got up and walked to the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bare room with the quilt he'd spread on the bed 2 days ago. Then he started cleaning. He swept the floor, wiped down the windowsill, found a rag under the sink and scrubbed the baseboards on his hands and knees. He worked in silence for 3 hours, scrubbing a room that might never be used, preparing a home for a child who might never come. But he cleaned it anyway, because that's what showing up looks like when there's nobody watching. It looks like a 63-year-old man on his knees at 3 a.m, scrubbing a floor for a little girl he met 6 hours ago, because the world told her she didn't matter, and he'd be damned if he was going to let the world be right. At 5:30 he showered, put on clean clothes, made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen counter. Then he got on his bike and rode across town. He was at Mrs. Langford's door at 7:15, still wearing the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept, but standing straight, standing ready, standing there, because he'd promised. And Iron McCord did not break promises. Mrs. Langford opened the door and looked him up and down. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the careful posture of someone who'd been doing foster care long enough to know that not every adult who shows up for a child actually stays. She's been asking for you since 5 this morning, Mrs. Langford said. Wouldn't eat breakfast, just sat at the table holding some kind of metal pin and asking when the man with the beard was coming. Iron's throat closed. He nodded and walked inside. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table in borrowed clothes that were too big for her. A yellow t-shirt that hung to her knees and sweatpants rolled up 3 times at the ankles. 2 other foster children sat nearby eating cereal. They stared at Iron. He ignored them. He only saw Emma. She saw him, and her face did something he'd never forget. It went from blank to terrified to hopeful to something beyond all 3. Some emotion that didn't have a name. The face of a person who has just learned that the impossible can happen. You came back, she said. I told you I would. She held up the pin. I kept it safe. I knew you would. Emma slid off her chair and walked to him, not running, not rushing, just walking with the deliberate care of a child who was testing whether the floor would hold. She stopped in front of him and looked up. Can I stay with you? Iron knelt down. That's what I'm working on, sweetheart. It takes a little time, but I'm not going anywhere. How much time? I don't know yet, but I'll be here every single day until we figure it out. And after that, I'll still be here. Emma studied his face. She reached out and touched one of the scars on his knuckle with her fingertip, lightly, like she was reading it. Does that hurt? Not anymore. Good. She pulled her hand back and held the pin against her chest. I don't want you to hurt. Something broke open in Iron McCord that he had spent 40 years sealing shut. He blinked hard and stood up because if he stayed on that floor one more second, he was going to fall apart in front of a 5-year-old who needed him to be strong. Have you eaten? He asked. She shook her head. Well, that's unacceptable. What do you like for breakfast? Pancakes. Iron looked at Mrs. Langford. You mind if I use your kitchen? Mrs. Langford, who had been watching this entire exchange from the doorway with tears streaming silently down her face, waved him toward the stove without a word. Iron made pancakes. They were terrible. He burned the first three and undercooked the fourth, and the fifth was shaped like a lopsided football. Emma ate every single one and asked for more. "These are really bad," she said, chewing. "I know. Can you make them again tomorrow?" "Yeah, sweetheart, I can make them again tomorrow." The next 72 hours unfolded at a speed that defied everything Diane Vasquez knew about the child welfare system. The background check on Iron came back Wednesday morning. Arrests, 4. Bar fights in his 20s. Disorderly conduct at a rally in 2009. Unlawful assembly during a protest in 2016. Felonies, 0. Crimes involving children, 0. Crimes involving drugs, 0. Domestic violence, 0. His finances were modest but stable. The house on Juniper Road was owned outright, no mortgage. Steady income from the motorcycle repair shop he ran on the east side of town. He paid his taxes. He had health insurance. Diane sat in her office staring at the file. On paper, Garrett McCord was a better candidate than 60% of the approved foster parents in her database. The only red flag was a 3-word phrase that made every judge, every social worker, every bureaucrat in the child welfare system break out in hives. Hell's Angels president. She called her supervisor. "I need guidance on the McCord placement." "Diane, you cannot place a child with the president of a motorcycle gang. He's the only person in this entire city who tried to help her. That's not how this works, and you know it. I know a 5-year-old girl is sitting in emergency care right now, holding a metal pin and refusing to eat unless someone promises her that the man who gave it to her is coming back. That's what I know." Silence on the line, long enough for Diane to hear her own heartbeat. "Do the home study," her supervisor said finally. "If it passes, I'll sign off. But if this goes sideways, it's on you. It's already on all of us. It's been on us since Monday." Diane drove to Juniper Road that afternoon. Iron had spent the morning buying things. A small bed from the furniture store on Route 66. Purple sheets because Mrs. Langford had mentioned Emma liked purple. A stuffed bunny from the toy store because Emma had told him about the one she'd left at home. The one with one ear missing. He'd found one with both ears and figured Emma could decide if she wanted to fix that or not. The home study took 2 hours. Diane checked every room, every cabinet, every outlet, every corner of the house that a 5-year-old might find dangerous. She asked Iron questions about discipline, about routines, about what he'd do if Emma had a nightmare. "Sit with her until it passes," Iron said. "Same thing I'd want someone to do for me." "What if she asks about her mother?" "I tell her the truth, age-appropriate truth. Her mom is sick, not cold and flu sick, but sick in a way that made her make bad choices, and none of it is Emma's fault." "What if Kristen Dawson wants contact?" "Then we deal with it through the courts. I won't keep Emma from her mother if it's safe, but safe comes first, always." Diane wrote for a long time, then she looked up and set her pen down. "Mr. McCord, I have to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer." "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this? You don't know this child. You have no obligation to her. You could have made your point at the school, gone home, let the system handle it. Why go this far?" Iron sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd planned the ride with Jace and Boone 5 days ago. He thought about the question, really thought about it, turned it over in his hands the way he'd turn a wrench, looking for the honest answer underneath all the easy ones. "When I was 9 years old," he said slowly, "my old man left, just gone one morning. My mom worked 2 jobs and drank away a third of what she made. I used to sit on the porch after school and wait for somebody to come home. Some days nobody did." He paused. Diane said nothing. "A neighbor named Walt found me sitting outside one night in November. Freezing. He brought me inside, gave me soup, let me sleep on his couch. Did that every time my mom didn't come home. For 3 years. Never asked for anything. Never called the cops. Never made a big deal out of it. Just showed up. What happened to Walt? Died when I was 12. Heart attack. After that, nobody showed up anymore. Iron looked at the spare bedroom door, the one with the purple sheets he'd put on an hour ago. I spent 30 years being angry about that, about Walt dying, about nobody replacing him. Then I saw Emma sitting in that parking lot, and I realized something. What? I can be Walt. I can be the guy who shows up. Diane closed her notebook. She looked at Iron for a long moment. Two people who'd both seen the worst of what happens to children when the world looks away. Two people who knew that the system was broken, and that sometimes the only thing standing between a child and the abyss was one stubborn person who refused to walk past. I'm recommending emergency placement, she said. You'll have a court date within 2 weeks to formalize temporary custody. There will be monthly visits, random check-ins. If anything, and I mean anything, raises a concern, she's out. Understood. I'll bring her tomorrow morning. Iron nodded. After Diane left, he walked into the spare bedroom. He sat on the edge of the small bed with the purple sheets and held the stuffed bunny in his scarred hands and cried. He cried the way men cry when they've held it together too long, silently, shoulders shaking. Alone in a room he'd prepared for a child he'd known for less than 48 hours, but who had already rearranged everything inside him. Jace found him like that 30 minutes later. He'd let himself in through the back door the way he always did, carrying a bag of groceries because Iron's refrigerator contained beer and mustard and nothing else a child could eat. Jace set the groceries down, looked at Iron's face, and sat beside him on the bed without a word. Two Hell's Angels on a child's bed with purple sheets, saying nothing, because nothing needed to be said. You're going to be good at this, Jace finally said. I burned the pancakes. You'll learn. Thursday morning, Diane's county vehicle pulled into the driveway on Juniper Road at 9:15. Iron was standing on the porch. He'd been standing there since 7. The back door opened and Emma climbed out. New clothes that Diane had picked up. A white t-shirt and jeans that actually fit, Unnie Kerrs with little stars on them. Her brown hair was brushed and pulled back in a ponytail that Mrs. Langford had done that morning. She stood on the driveway and looked at the house. Then she looked at Iron. Is this where you live? This is where we live, if you want it to be. Emma walked up the porch steps, slowly, testing every one. She stopped in front of him. Can I see my room? Iron opened the door and led her down the hallway. Second door on the left. He pushed it open and stepped back. Emma stood in the doorway. She saw the bed, the purple sheets, the stuffed bunny sitting on the pillow. She didn't move for a long time. So long that Iron's heart started hammering because he didn't know if he'd gotten it wrong. Then she walked to the bed and picked up the bunny and held it against her face, and her shoulders started shaking. It has both ears, she whispered. I figured you could decide if you want to keep them both or not. Emma sat on the bed. She bounced once, testing it. Then she lay down and pulled the purple sheets up to her chin and held the bunny with one hand and Iron's pin with the other. This is mine? She asked. This is yours. Nobody's going to take it. Nobody. Ever. Emma closed her eyes. She was asleep within minutes. Just like that. Like her body had been waiting for permission to rest. Like she'd been holding herself awake for 68 hours through sheer will. And now, finally, someone else was keeping watch. Iron stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. He made a promise to himself that he would break every bone in his body before he let anything hurt this child again. Diane, still standing in the hallway, touched his arm. The court date is set for the 18th. Judge Patricia Moreno. She's tough, but fair. I'll be ready. Iron, Diane hesitated. The media is going to make this a circus. National outlets are already calling my office. Everyone wants the story of the biker who saved the little girl. I don't care about the story. I care about her. I know, but the attention could help or hurt your case. The judge will see everything. Then let her see everything. I've got nothing to hide. Diane left. Iron pulled a chair from the kitchen and set it in Emma's doorway and sat there while she slept. He didn't move, didn't check his phone, didn't close his eyes. Just sat there and watched over her the way Walt had watched over him 30 years ago in a kitchen that smelled like canned soup and cigarette smoke. Boone showed up at noon with lunch. He stood beside Iron and looked at the sleeping girl and shook his head. My granddaughter's got that same bunny, Boone said. Same color. Boone. Yeah? I need to learn how to braid hair. Boone stared at him. Then a smile cracked across his weathered face. The first real smile Iron had seen from him in days. My daughter can teach you. She'll be thrilled. The days took shape. Morning routine. Wake up. Breakfast. School. Iron learned that Emma liked her eggs scrambled, not fried. That she wanted her toast cut in triangles, not rectangles. That she needed the hallway light on at night or she couldn't sleep. That she checked 3 times every morning to make sure Iron was still in the house before she'd get dressed. The first time she couldn't find him, he'd stepped outside to start his bike. She screamed so loud the neighbor called the police. Iron ran back inside and found her standing in the hallway, shaking, tears streaming down her face. I thought you left, she said. I thought you were gone. He knelt down and held her and said, I will never leave this house without telling you first. That's a rule, my rule, okay? Okay. Say it back to me. You will never leave without telling me first. That's right, and I don't break rules. She wiped her eyes. You broke the pancakes. That's different. She almost smiled. Almost. He drove her to school in the sidecar he'd welded in his garage. The first morning, every parent in the drop-off lane stared. Some pulled their children closer. One mother called the school to complain. Principal Marsh's temporary replacement, a woman named Dr. Sandra Hayes, took the call and responded with 4 words. He's her legal guardian. Mrs. Rachel Torres, the only person in the entire school who had filed a report, who had actually tried, met Iron at the classroom door on the first day. Mr. McCord, I'm Emma's teacher. I want you to know that I reported her absence on Tuesday. I was told it was being handled. I know, Iron said. You're the only one who did anything. Mrs. Torres's eyes filled. It wasn't enough. It was more than anyone else did. That counts. Emma settled into the classroom the way a plant settles when you move it from shade to sunlight. Quiet at first, watchful, still running the math in her head about whether this would last. But Mrs. Torres was patient and warm, and the other children were curious about the girl who arrived every morning in a motorcycle sidecar. A boy named Marco asked her at lunch on the 3rd day, Is that your dad who drives the big motorcycle? Emma thought about it. Thought about it the way she thought about everything now, carefully, like words were things that mattered, and you should choose them right. He's my Iron, she said. The name stuck. Around school, McCord became Emma's Iron, and gradually the whispers and stares softened into something closer to acceptance. Not from everyone. Some parents circulated a petition to prevent Iron from entering school property. Dr. Hayes threw it in the trash. Every Tuesday at 3:15, 50 Hells Angels rode past Pinecrest Elementary in formation. Engines screaming, windows shaking, a weekly earthquake that said, We're still watching. We're not going anywhere. Emma heard the bikes from her classroom every Tuesday. She'd stop whatever she was doing and smile, just for a second. Then she'd go back to her work. Mrs. Torres noticed but never said anything. Some things didn't need words. At home, the nights were harder than the days. Emma woke up screaming twice in the first week, 3 times in the second. Always the same dream. She was sitting at the flagpole, and everyone was walking past her, and she was trying to scream, but no sound came out. Iron sat with her every time. He didn't say much, just sat on the edge of her bed and put his hand on hers, and waited until her breathing slowed. Are you still here? She'd ask in the dark. Still here. Promise? Promise. One night, the third week, she woke up crying and said something that stopped his heart. "Iron, am I broken?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "My mommy didn't want me. Maybe I'm broken and that's why." He sat very still. He'd faced men with weapons. He'd ridden through storms that could tear a bike off the road. He'd been in fights where he couldn't see through the blood in his eyes. None of that required the kind of courage it took to answer a 5-year-old who was asking if she was defective. "You're not broken, Emma. Not even a little bit. Your mom is sick. Sick people sometimes can't do the things they're supposed to do. That's about her. It's not about you. It was never about you." "Then why do I feel broken?" "Because somebody hurt you. And when somebody hurts you, especially somebody who's supposed to love you, it feels like something's wrong with you. But it's not. The wrong thing is what happened, not who you are." Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Iron?" "Yeah?" "Can you read the Bear Book?" He read her the Bear Book. She fell asleep on page 4. He sat in her doorway until dawn. The court date arrived on a Tuesday. Iron put on the only dress shirt he owned, a dark blue button-down that Boone's daughter had ironed for him that morning. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and hardly recognized the man staring back. Same scars, same hard face, same pale blue eyes. But something behind the eyes had changed. Something had shifted into place that had been loose for 30 years. Emma wore a new dress that the women of the club had bought for her, white with small purple flowers. She held Iron's hand as they walked into the Yavapai County Courthouse. Behind them, 30 Hells Angels in their cleanest clothes filed into the gallery. Jace had shaved. Boone wore a collared shirt for the first time anyone could remember. Judge Patricia Moreno presided. She was 61 years old, silver-haired. A reputation for fairness exceeded only by her reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense. She'd read every document in the file. She'd watched the news footage. She had opinions. "Mr. McCord," she said, "you're petitioning for temporary guardianship of Emma Dawson." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you are the president of the Hells Angels Arizona Charter." "Yes, Your Honor." The state has concerns about placing a minor in the care of someone affiliated with an organization that has been linked to criminal activity. Iron's lawyer, Martin Reyes, a public defender who'd volunteered for the case after seeing the news, stood. "Your Honor, Mr. McCord has no violent felonies. His background check is clean. His home passed inspection. He has demonstrated—" "I've read the file, Mr. Reyes. I'd like to hear from Mr. McCord directly." Iron stood. He buttoned his jacket and then unbuttoned it because it felt wrong. He wasn't a man who wore suits. He was a man who wore leather and grease and the road. And pretending otherwise would be a lie. And lying in front of a judge who could decide Emma's future was something he refused to do. "Your Honor, I'm not going to pretend I'm something I'm not. I ride with the Hells Angels. I've been in fights. I've been arrested. That's my record, and I own all of it. Go on. But I've never hurt a child. I've never neglected a child. And when I found out a 5-year-old girl had been sitting in a school parking lot for over 60 hours with no food and no water while every teacher and cop and church-going citizen in this city walked past her, I didn't file a report. I didn't leave a voicemail. I showed up with 800 brothers. Because that's what we do. We show up." The gallery was silent. Moreno studied him the way she'd studied 1,000 people who'd stood in that spot, reading him, weighing him. "Miss Vasquez," the judge said, "your recommendation?" Diane stood. "Your Honor, I've conducted the home study. I've done weekly visits. The child is thriving. She's eating regularly, sleeping through the night, performing well in school. In 15 years with CPS, I have rarely seen a placement this successful, this quickly." "And your professional opinion on Mr. McCord as a guardian?" Diane paused. She looked at Iron, then at Emma, then back at the judge. "He's the best thing that's happened to this child. The system failed Emma Dawson. Every institution that was supposed to protect her failed her. He didn't. Moreno looked at Emma. Young lady, can you come up here? Emma looked at Iron. He squeezed her hand and nodded. She walked to the front of the courtroom with her chin up and her bunny tucked under her arm. Emma, do you know why you're here today? So the judge can decide if I can stay with Iron. That's right, and I want to ask you something. Do you feel safe with Mr. McCord? Emma nodded. Can you tell me why? Emma thought about it with the same seriousness she'd shown when Iron first offered his pin in that parking lot, taking her time, weighing the words. Because he came back, she said. He said he would, and he did. Every time. Moreno's pen stopped moving. Everyone else said things, Emma continued, her small voice carrying through the silent courtroom. The teachers said they'd help. The police said they knew. The school said someone was coming, but nobody came. Iron came, and he keeps coming. Every day. She paused, looked back at Iron, then turned to the judge one more time. He makes bad pancakes, but he tries really hard. A sound went through the gallery that was half laugh and half sob. Boone wiped his face with both hands. Jay stared at the ceiling and blinked rapidly. Martin Reyes gripped the edge of his table. Moreno wrote something in her file. Then she looked up. Temporary guardianship is granted to Garrett McCord, effective immediately. Review in 6 months. Miss Vasquez will continue monthly visits. She paused, looked at Iron over the top of her glasses. Mr. McCord, this court doesn't often grant custody to someone with your background, but this court also doesn't often see a town fail a child as completely as this one did. You stepped into a gap that should never have existed. Don't make me regret this. You won't, Your Honor. Emma ran back to Iron, and he lifted her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder and whispered, We're staying together? We're staying together. In the gallery, 30 Hell's Angels applauded so loud, the bailiff gave up trying to restore order. Diane Vasquez sat in her chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. Martin Reyes shook Iron's hand. You know this is just the beginning, right? Martin said. Temporary isn't permanent. Iron held Emma on his hip like he'd been doing it his whole life. I know, but I've got time. That night, Iron put Emma to bed. Purple sheets, stuffed bunny, pin on the nightstand. He read her the Bear Book. She fell asleep on page 4 with her hand resting on top of his. He sat in the doorway for a long time. Boone found him there around 10. She's out? Boone asked. Page 4, new record. Boone leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. She told the judge you make bad pancakes. I do make bad pancakes. She didn't mention anything else. Not the sidecar, not the club, not the house. Pancakes. That's what mattered to her, that somebody makes her breakfast in the morning. Iron looked at his hands, scarred knuckles, grease under the nails. Hands that had thrown punches and wrenched engines and gripped handlebars for 3 decades. Hands that now held a stuffed bunny during bedtime stories and flipped terrible pancakes and were slowly, painfully learning to braid a little girl's hair. I'm going to learn to make good ones, he said. I know you will. And I'm going to learn the fishtail braid. She asked for one last week, couldn't figure it out. YouTube, brother. Everything's on YouTube. Iron stood up. He took one last look at Emma sleeping in her bed, in her room, in her home. Then he walked to the kitchen with Boone and they sat at the table, and Iron picked up his phone. A text from Wyatt, the young prospect who'd first seen Emma in that parking lot, the one who'd made the call that started everything. How's the kid? Iron typed back one word, home. 6 months passed and the world tried to forget about Emma Dawson. Prescott Valley moved on the way comfortable towns always do, burying the shame under new routines and revised policies, and the quiet agreement to never talk about it again. The school board held 3 emergency meetings. Principal Marsh resigned before they could fire him. Officer Prescott was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation that everyone knew would end in termination. The mayor issued 4 public apologies, each one longer and more carefully worded than the last. But Iron didn't let them forget. Every Tuesday at 3:15, 50 Hells Angels rode past Pinecrest Elementary in formation. Engines screaming, windows shaking, a weekly earthquake of chrome and leather that said, "We're still watching and we're not going anywhere." The parents in the pickup lane heard it. The teachers heard it. The new principal, Dr. Hayes, heard it and never once complained. Emma heard it from her classroom every Tuesday. She'd stop whatever she was doing and smile, just for a second. A private smile that belonged to her and the sound of those engines, and nobody else. The adoption paperwork began in month 3. Martin Reyes warned Iron it would be a war. He was right. The state assigned an attorney to review the case. The attorney subpoenaed Iron's club records, his financial history, his medical records. They interviewed his neighbors, his employees at the shop, the woman who sold him groceries. They pulled every thread they could find, looking for the one that would unravel everything. Iron endured all of it without complaint. Every form, every interview, every invasive question about his past. He answered with the same steady patience that had kept Emma eating pancakes every morning and sleeping through the night in purple sheets. "Have you ever been involved in illegal drug activity, Mr. McCord?" "No." "Have you ever been convicted of a violent crime?" "No." "Are you currently involved in any criminal enterprise?" "I run a motorcycle repair shop. I fix bikes. I pay taxes. You want to see the receipts?" The state attorney didn't find what she was looking for, because it wasn't there. Then, in month 4, the phone call came that Iron had been dreading since the day he carried Emma into the house on Juniper Road. Martin called on a Thursday afternoon. Emma was at school. Iron was at the shop replacing a carburetor when he saw Martin's name on the screen. "She wants her back," Martin said. Iron's wrench stopped moving. "Who?" "Kristen Dawson. She completed a 30-day rehab program in Tucson. Her court-appointed lawyer filed a motion this morning to restore parental rights." Iron set the wrench down slowly, carefully, because if he didn't set it down carefully, he was going to throw it through a wall. "She left her daughter in a parking lot for 68 hours. "I know. She was smoking meth in a motel room while her 5-year-old was drinking from a garden hose." "I know, Iron, but the law gives biological parents significant standing. If she can demonstrate rehabilitation and a stable living situation, the court has to consider it." "Consider it? She nearly killed her child through neglect, and they want to consider giving her back." "I'm on your side, but I need you to understand what we're dealing with. The system is built to reunify families. That's the default position. We have to prove that reunification isn't in Emma's best interest. A 5-year-old drinking from a garden hose because her mother was getting high in a motel room isn't in her best interest. How much more proof do they need?" "The hearing is set for next month. We'll be ready." Iron hung up. He stood at his workbench and gripped the edge until his knuckles went white. He thought about Emma that morning, how she'd eaten her scrambled eggs and told him about a drawing she was making in class. How she'd checked 3 times that he was still in the house. How she'd held his hand all the way to the sidecar because she still couldn't bring herself to walk to school without touching him. He didn't tell her. He didn't want her to know that the woman who'd abandoned her was now fighting to get her back. Not out of love, but because the rehab counselor had convinced Kristen that regaining custody would be a milestone in her recovery. Emma wasn't a daughter to Kristen. She was a step in a 12-step program. Diane Vasquez called that night. Emma was in bed. Iron stood in the kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear. "Kristen's lawyer is going to argue that you're an unfit guardian based on your club affiliation," Diane said. "They'll bring up every arrest, every news article, every negative thing ever written about the Hells Angels." "Let them." "Iron, I need you to be smart about this. Not tough, smart. The judge needs to see the father, not the biker." "I'm both. That's the whole point." "Then make sure both show up in that courtroom." Iron spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Martin filed motions. Diane submitted reports. Iron gathered every document, every receipt, every school report card, every note Mrs. Torres had sent home praising Emma's progress. He built a case the way he built an engine, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, until every part was where it needed to be. The night before the hearing, he sat at the kitchen table after Emma was asleep. Jason Boone came over. They sat across from him the way they'd sat 100 times before. But this time was different. This time, everything was on the line. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jace said, "we're with you." "I know." 30 brothers confirmed for the gallery, clean clothes, best behavior. "Tell them I said thank you." Boone reached across the table and gripped Iron's forearm. "She's your daughter, brother. Blood or no blood. Everybody in that courtroom is going to see it." "What if they don't?" Boone held his grip. "Then we figure out what comes next. But we don't quit. That's not what we do." The courtroom was packed. 30 Hell's Angels in the gallery. Button-down shirts, clean jeans. Boone had shaved his beard for the first time in 12 years. Jace wore a tie his ex-wife had picked out. They looked like the most uncomfortable group of men in Arizona, and they didn't care. Because this wasn't about them. Kristen Dawson sat at the opposite table. She was thin, hollow-cheeked, the fragile look of someone held together by willpower and medication. She wore clothes that were too new, the kind a lawyer picks out for court. She didn't look at Iron. She didn't look at Emma, who sat in front row between Boone and Jace, holding her bunny. Kristen's lawyer made his argument. Rehabilitation, stability, a new apartment, a part-time job, the biological bond between mother and child, the constitutional right to parent. He spoke well. He spoke with conviction. He built a case that sounded reasonable on paper. Then Martin stood. And he didn't talk about the law. He talked about a garden hose. "Your Honor, I could cite statutes and precedents and case law, but I want to talk about what actually happened. A 5-year-old girl kept herself alive for 68 hours because her mother chose a glass pipe over her own child. She slept on concrete. She drank from a playground fountain until the school locked its doors. Then she walked 2 blocks and found a garden hose and drank warm, metallic water from a stranger's yard. She was 5 years old. She did this alone." He paused. "A school locked its doors on her. A police officer waved at her and kept driving. A church full of people walked past her on a Sunday morning. And a man who runs a motorcycle club heard about her from 300 miles away and rode through the night with 800 brothers because he couldn't stomach the idea of a child being invisible." Martin turned to the judge. "Kristen Dawson has the legal right to petition this court, but Emma Dawson has the human right to be safe. These two rights are in conflict today. And when they conflict, Your Honor, the child must win." Judge Moreno asked Emma to approach. Emma walked to the front of the courtroom for the second time in 6 months. She was taller now, healthier. Her brown hair was braided neatly. 2 French braids that Iron had spent 3 months learning to do, practicing on rope at midnight until his thick fingers memorized the pattern. "Emma," Moreno said gently, "do you know who that woman is?" Emma looked at Kristen for the first time. Something moved across her face, fast and complicated. A flash of recognition followed by something that wasn't anger and wasn't sadness, but lived in the space between both. "She's my mommy," Emma said quietly. "Do you want to live with your mommy?" Emma was silent for a long time. The courtroom held its breath. 30 bikers in the gallery sat completely still. Jace's hands were gripped together so tight his knuckles were white. Boone's eyes were closed. Then Emma turned and looked at Iron. He sat perfectly still, scarred hands flat on the table, pale blue eyes locked on hers. Not coaching her, not signaling her, just being there, the way he'd been there every morning for 6 months. "My mommy didn't come," Emma said, turning back to the judge. "I waited 68 hours and she didn't come. I sat at the school and I waved at people and nobody stopped. Nobody cared. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of a child who had been through something that burned away everything except the truth. Iron came. He comes every day. He makes me pancakes and braids my hair and reads me the Bear Book even though I've heard it 100 times. He never doesn't come. She paused. Then she said the words that would stay with every person in that courtroom for the rest of their lives. I love my mommy, but I love Iron more, because Iron stays. Kristen made a sound, a small, broken sound that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. She shook it off and stood up. She's right, Kristen said. Her voice was raw, stripped of everything except the jagged edge of a truth she'd been running from for 6 months. She's right, and I know she's right, and I hate that she's right. She looked at Iron for the first time. Two people who had nothing in common except a little girl who meant everything to both of them. You take care of my baby, Kristen said. Iron met her eyes. Every day. Kristen nodded. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them. She turned to the judge. I'm withdrawing my petition. I can't be what she needs. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She looked at Emma, and for a moment, just one moment, the woman she used to be came through. The woman who showed up late to school events, but showed up. The woman who forgot permission slips, but remembered birthdays. I'm sorry, baby, Kristen said. I'm so sorry I didn't come. Emma didn't say anything. She walked back to Iron and climbed into his lap and buried her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held her against him and felt her heart beating against his and knew that this was what everything had been for. Every mile, every fight, every scar, every night on a porch waiting for someone who never came. All of it had been leading here. Moreno granted the withdrawal. Then she looked at Iron. Mr. McCord, there is a petition for full adoption pending before this court. Given today's developments, I'm inclined to expedite. Ms. Vasquez, is CPS prepared to support this adoption? Diane stood. Without reservation, Your Honor. Then let the record show that this court, having reviewed all evidence, all testimony, and the demonstrated commitment of the petitioner, grants the adoption of Emma Dawson by Garrett McCord, effective immediately. Emma Dawson is now legally Emma McCord. The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted. 30 Hell's Angels in button-down shirts and borrowed ties rose to their feet and roared like the walls couldn't hold them. Boone covered his face with both hands, and his shoulders shook. Jace pounded the bench in front of him so hard it cracked. Mrs. Torres, who'd come to the hearing on her lunch break, sat in the back row and sobbed into her hands. Emma pulled back from Iron's chest and looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her face was blazing with something that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Something that had been burned out of her in a school parking lot and slowly, carefully rebuilt. One pancake at a time. I'm yours now? She asked. You were always mine. Now we just have the paper. She held up the pin. The same death head pin she'd carried every single day since he'd given it to her, near a flagpole where nobody stopped. Do you want this back now? You keep it. It belongs to you. Emma smiled, a full, real, blazing smile that burned away every shadow of the girl who'd sat alone waiting for someone who would never come. Outside the courthouse, Iron put Emma in the sidecar. Jason Boone pulled up beside him. 30 bikes idled behind them. Where to? Jace asked. Pinecrest Elementary. One more pass. 30 bikes rolled through downtown Prescott Valley at 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. They passed the school when the parking lot was full of parents. Teachers stood at the doors, watching, checking, making sure every child had someone waiting. The Emma laws were posted on a sign by the entrance. No child left unaccounted for. No child overlooked. No child invisible. Emma watched it all from her sidecar. She raised her hand and waved at a little girl being picked up by her father. The girl waved back. Iron, Emma said as they turned onto Juniper Road. Yeah, sweetheart? Can we get ice cream? It's Tuesday. Iron almost laughed. Yeah, we can get ice cream. They pulled into the driveway. Boone was already inside somehow, burning popcorn on the stove and arguing with Jace about football. The house smelled like motor oil and slightly burnt food and the lavender shampoo that Emma insisted on using, even though it cost more than Iron's. That night, Iron tucked Emma into bed. Purple sheets, stuffed bunny, pin on the nightstand. He read her the Bear book. She fell asleep on page 4, her hand resting on top of his like she was making sure he wouldn't leave. He sat in the doorway for a long time. Boone found him there around 10. She's out? Boone asked. Page 4. Boone leaned against the wall. Iron. Yeah? She told the judge you make bad pancakes. I do make bad pancakes. She didn't mention anything else. Not the sidecar, not the club, not the house, not 800 bikes. Pancakes. That's what mattered to her. Iron looked at his hands. Scarred knuckles, grease under the nails. Hands that had thrown punches and wrenched engines and gripped handlebars for 30 years. Hands that now braided a little girl's hair every morning and flipped terrible pancakes and held a stuffed bunny during bedtime stories. That's what matters to all of us, Iron, Boone said. Not the big gestures, not 800 bikes. Just somebody who shows up in the morning and makes breakfast. That's the whole thing. Iron stood up, took one last look at Emma sleeping in her bed. In her room. In her home. Years later, when people asked Iron about that day, about the 800 bikes, about the town that looked away and the outlaws who didn't, he always said the same thing. Everybody talks about the rescue, the bikes, the confrontation, the cameras. That's not the story. The story is Tuesday morning at 7:15 when I burn the pancakes and Emma eats them anyway. The story is the braid that takes me 20 minutes because my fingers are too big. The story is the bear who can't find his hat. Page 4. Every single night. He'd pause, then he'd say, anybody can show up once. The hard part is showing up every day. That's where the real courage is. Not in 800 motorcycles. In one kitchen, one morning, one pancake at a time. Emma McCord grew up fierce and kind and certain down to her bones that she was loved. She kept the pin on her nightstand until she was 18. Then she moved it to a chain around her neck, where it hung next to her heart for the rest of her life. And every Tuesday at 3:15, no matter where she was, no matter how old she got, she'd stop what she was doing and listen. Because somewhere she knew the bikes were still riding, still watching, still refusing to let a child be invisible. That was the legacy of Emma McCord, a girl the world forgot and a man the world feared. And the family they built, not from blood, but from the simple, stubborn, sacred act of showing up. Iron McCord, outlaw and father, never drove past anyone again. And every morning for the rest of his life, he made pancakes. They were never perfect. Emma ate every single one.